Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly incredible. We are going to tell everything about the creation of the Philippine community from the beginning until now. It's a fascinating journey, really, watching how these isolated groups, scattered across a massive archipelago, manage to weave themselves into this singular, totally unshakable global identity. Okay, let's dive right into this with a number that is just mind-bending. 709,000. Now, for the longest time, the consensus was that human presence in the Philippines went back maybe 67,000 years. But recent excavations in Kalinga completely threw that old timeline out the window. Archaeologists dug up the bones of a now extinct rhinoceros, and these bones had very clear, undeniable butchery marks on them, right alongside dozens of prehistoric stone tools. So this is absolute proof that early hominins were hanging out on the island of Luzon 709,000 years ago. Now, how exactly they crossed those deep sea straits to get there, maybe on natural rafts of floating mangroves that got snapped off by typhoons, well, that remains a pretty massive mystery. And honestly, that deep ancient history leads us directly to the core question we're tackling today. Think about it. The Philippines is a giant archipelago. We're talking over 7,000 islands, all chopped up by deep sea straits. Before the 16th century, the people living there absolutely did not see themselves as one unified group. You've got over 175 different ethno-linguistic groups speaking over 100 languages. So how on earth did a geography that is literally designed to keep people separated end up producing one of the most tightly knit global communities in the world? Section 1. The First Island Settlers. To answer our question, we really have to go back to the foundation. Let's look at the earliest human migrations. Over 4,000 years ago, Austronesian migrants sailed down from what is today's southern China, somehow navigating those treacherous deep-sea straits. They set up these small, scattered settlements right along the rivers. And those rivers were everything. They were absolute lifelines, providing fresh water and seafood, and they totally sustained these early folks. Because of the super rugged terrain and all that water, these groups were physically pretty isolated from each other. So instead of building some massive central empire, people connected through local kinship, both biological family and the people they simply had to rely on to survive. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the language itself reveals the history. The term that used for these early communities of, say, 30 to 100 households was barangay. But if you trace the root of that word in Tagalog, it originally means boat. It comes from the balangay, which was the oldest community vessel these seafarers used. So when they finally settled on land, the boat literally became the village. They were led by a chieftain called a datu, who protected everyone and handled trade. And that single barangay was pretty much their entire socio-political universe. Section 2. Myths and Ancient Communities. But, just living near someone doesn't automatically make you a community. We have to look at the shared beliefs, the cultural logic that really bound these fragmented groups together way before any central state came along. Enter the concept of pamayanan. This is so much more than just a cluster of houses. Pamayanan is this idea of an ancient community united by a shared culture, the interconnected environment of the rivers and seas, and maritime trade. Long before European ships ever showed up, these local communities were already interacting and trading rice, spices, and aromatics with merchants from as far away as India and China. They had built this really vibrant civilizational web. And the thing that really wove this web together was a shared, rich mythology. Ancient Filipinos were animists, meaning they saw spirits in everything around them. They worshipped Bathala as the supreme creator of the universe. And since they spent their lives on the water, Aman Sinaya, the primordial goddess of the sea, was absolutely central to their world. They prayed to Upalaki, the god of the sun and war, and they were terrified of Bakunawa, this massive, legendary dragon that they believed would swallow the moon and cause eclipses. These shared stories were basically the glue that forged a common spiritual identity across thousands of scattered islands. Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds, forging the Filipino nation. So here is where history takes a massive turn. In the 16th century, the Spanish arrive, and they bring with them this incredibly rigid racial hierarchy. Right at the top, you had the Peninsulares, who were born in Spain, then the Insulares, born in the Philippines, then the mixed-race mestizos, and all the way at the bottom were the native Filipinos, who the Spanish labeled indios. But here's the critical part. The indigenous people weren't just passively accepting this. They creatively adapted. They took the Catholicism forced upon them and indigenized it. They created this unique Filipino folk Christianity, cleverly keeping their ancient animistic roots alive right beneath the Spanish Catholic surface. Over 3 long centuries of Spanish rule, something really profound shifted in how they viewed community. The word bayan, which originally just meant a local town or a physical settlement, started to take on a whole new meaning. Through shared struggles, forced labor, and dealing with a common oppressor, their collective consciousness blew wide open. Bayan evolved to mean a unified nation or a unified people. The psychological borders of their community grew from just their local village to encompass the entire archipelago. And this brilliantly illustrates the rapid chain of events that eventually forged the modern political state. In 1869, the Suez Canal opens up, and suddenly European ideas of freedom are flowing in. By the 1890s, you have nationalist movements taking shape, like José Rizal's Liga Filipina and Andrés Bonifacio's secret Katipunan society. This tension inevitably explodes into the 1896 revolt against Spain. By 1898, Emilio Aguinaldo actually declares independence, though unfortunately a tragic war with the United States kicks off almost immediately after. It wouldn't be until 1946, right out of the devastation of World War II, that true, fully recognized independence was finally achieved. Section 4. Revolts and People Power. So this hard-won independence brings us right into a very turbulent 20th century. The unified Bayan really begins to flex its collective muscle against both colonial powers and their own domestic rulers. And to really grasp this revolutionary spirit, we can actually look back to their folklore. Take the legend of Bernardo Carpio. He's this mythological hero trapped between 2 great mountains, incredibly powerful, chained up, but destined to one day break free. During the colonial era, people started using this story as a metaphor for themselves. It perfectly connects that ancient strength with a modern revolutionary spirit, a people chained by circumstance, for sure, but absolutely never broken. And we see that exact spirit play out over and over in recent history. The late 20th and 21st centuries have been marked by some major political upheavals. You have the period from 1965 to 1986 under Ferdinand Marcos Sr., which brought martial law and steep economic decline, but that era ended with the incredibly famous 1986 EDSA People Power Revolution, a totally peaceful mass uprising that ousted the regime. We saw variations of that collective action again in 2001, when protests unseated Joseph Estrada. And today, the historical narrative is still shifting and competing, right? You see that clearly with the 2022 election of Marcos Jr., which shows this ongoing, really complex dialogue in the society between narratives of democratic triumph on one side and authoritarian nostalgia on the other. Section 5. The Modern Bayanihan Spirit. So, the crucial point is, where does all this history leave the Philippine community today? Let's zoom in to the present day and see how these deep ancient concepts of unity are surviving and adapting in our crazy fast-paced digital world. The key word you need to know here is bayanihan. Traditionally, this was this amazing physical practice where neighbors would literally get together, lift a family's entire nipa hut onto bamboo poles, and carry it on their shoulders to a new location. It was the ultimate, literal manifestation of civic unity. Now, obviously, Filipinos aren't literally carrying houses around much anymore, but that core instinct, the cultural DNA of lifting each other up, remains the absolute bedrock of their modern society. Now, what has changed quite a bit is the actual anatomy of the family. Economic pressures and urbanization mean fewer Filipinos are living in those big, traditional, multi-generational households all under one roof. Today, you've got millions of overseas Filipino workers, which creates these living apart together, or LAT arrangements. Families might be physically separated by entire oceans, but they stay fiercely connected. You also have younger folks prioritizing their careers, leading to single-income, no-kids, or sink households. So the physical shape of the community changes, sure, but the underlying bonds, just as strong. Basically, Bayanihan just went digital. It operates at lightning speed through pixels and pesos now. When a typhoon or natural disaster hits, crowdfunding campaigns instantly mobilize relief. For that massive global diaspora we talked about, everyday apps like Messenger, Viber, and WhatsApp are the unseen glue holding separated families together. Caregiving across borders is handled seamlessly with e-wallets and telemedicine. Even during the height of the COVID-19 lockdowns, we saw these amazing community pantries just spontaneously pop up all over the country. It was the absolute perfect modern translation of neighbors helping neighbors. We started out wanting to tell everything about the creation of the Philippine community from beginning until now, and just look at the scope of it. We've traced this incredible thread from ancient Austronesians in wooden boats navigating deep-sea straits to tight-knit rivering barangays through literally centuries of colonial struggle, all the way to a modern, digital diaspora that spans the entire globe. The thread was never broken, it just changed form. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question to ponder.
How does your own concept of community compare to this evolving, unbreakable spirit of Bayanihan? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.